welcome to the October edition of HR Hot Topics. I'm your host, Jody Schaefer, and as always, my aim is to make this the most informative 5-ish minutes of your month. This month's topic comes to us courtesy of an individual that I had. I was doing a presentation for a group of folks, and I was talking about all things HR and kind of what's on the horizon and what you need to be paying attention to. And I just casually mentioned that the I-9 form will be expiring on the 31st of October, and to make sure that you're pulling the newest form off of the uscis.gov website for any new hires you have going forward. And I kind of look out in the audience, and this one gentleman has a very confused look on his face. And so I, obviously it's kind of a casual environment. And I say, sir, do you have a question on the I-9? And he goes, yeah, what's an I-9? And I thought, oh dear, So this is somebody who owns his own business, had been in business for years, had never heard of an I-9, certainly did not have completed I-9s for any of his current staff, let alone any former employees. So I thought it was just a good reminder for me to talk about with all of you today and explain a little bit more about what the I-9 is, but also some of the recent changes that have happened with the I-9. So first and foremost, the I-9 is a document that every employer has to complete with every new employee, regardless of your size and regardless of the employee's status, meaning full-time, part-time, seasonal. If they are a W-2 employee on your payroll, then you need to have a completed I-9 on file for them. And the I-9 just verifies eligibility for that person to work lawfully in the United States. And so there's a handful of documents that the employee can produce, and you as the employer are physically inspecting those documents to the best of your ability, and you're writing down, on this specific form, what document the employee showed you. You're putting it in the appropriate column. The form has directions, so you're not guessing. And then you are signing and dating that you completed this form, and you're supposed to have it completed within 3 days of hire. And that's one of the areas where employers often make mistakes. They might know they have to complete the form, but the employee forgot to bring one of the pieces of documentation. So you say, that's fine, bring it tomorrow. They forget tomorrow, they forget next week, and before you know it, a week or two has passed and you realize you have this incomplete I-9 on your desk, and you've missed that window of within 3 days of hire. So do your best to complete these thoroughly, but don't post-date or backdate your I-9 forms. If you were ever to be audited, the fines for an incomplete form or a form that wasn't incomplete or with errors on it can range from $100 to $1,100 per form. So, times that by how many employees you have, and those fines can rack up pretty significantly. So you want to make sure that you're not trying to pull the wool over an auditor's eyes and make it look like you did something you didn't. It happens sometimes that you'll make mistakes on the form. If you do, cross through the mistake. Do not white it out. Don't use correction tape. Okay, again, you don't want it to appear as though you're trying to hide something, so you just cross out the mistake. You write in what the information should be, and then you date and initial it, right? That's how you fix those errors. So the I-9 forms that we've been using for a couple of years now, there's a date in the upper right-hand corner, and it's set to expire the end of October this year. So you'll have to make sure you go to the website, again, uscis.gov, pull the newest form down so that you are using the most recent form. That's one of the places where an auditor will often trip an employer up, right? You've got the wrong date on the form, so pull the most recent form. There has been some chatter I've been following. This hasn't been talked about much, but it appears that the new form may be streamlined, so it may look slightly different than the form you're used to using. The effort is to make it easier to complete. We'll see if that's true. I feel like the government never makes things easy for us. But one of the questions that I got from this gentleman after I sort of explained what the I-9 is and how to complete it, when to complete it, he said, okay, well, where do I send it? And I get that a lot. You don't actually send this form anywhere. You just hang on to it. And if you were ever audited, then you could produce it, right? So for record keeping, from a record keeping perspective, my recommendation is that you keep all of your I-9s together in one folder or one binder, or if you're scanning them and you're completing them digitally, that's fine too. But you keep them together, because if you were ever audited and they want to see your I-9s, you only want to show them the documents they're asking for. If you keep them in personnel files, then you give the auditor all of your personnel files. They're going to look at your I-9s and everything else in the personnel file, which you don't want. So keep them together, hang on to them, okay? And then you need to hold on to those. If the employee separates employment with you, you can shred the I-9 either a year after the date of termination or 3 years from date of hire. So if they weren't with you very long, you might end up keeping these for 3 years. So whichever's later, the year after date of separation or 3 years after date of hire, and then you can get rid of those I-9s for folks that no longer work with you. But otherwise, the folks that are still on your payroll, even if they're there for 10, 20 years, you're hanging on to that document for that long. Okay, so now's a good time to just take a look at all of your I-9s for your current employees. Make sure they're filled out completely accurately. If there are any errors that you see, cross through, make the change initial date. You've got that. And then the one other piece here that I'll just tell you, this is another kind of what's happening with the I-9, is that employers were required to physically examine the actual documents as part of this I-9 process. So copies of documents didn't count. And that was all well and good. I mean, it had its challenges, but COVID really turned that upside down because we were forced to work remotely. So the Department of Homeland Security during COVID said, okay, employers, you can actually examine those documents virtually, either through web conferencing or faxed copies or whatever, right? So they kind of loosened the rules around that. Those rules have been extended. The loosening of those rules have been extended through the end of this month. So through the end of October, employers are still allowed to examine these documents virtually if your workforce is primarily remote. But after the end of this month, we're not sure what they're going to do with that rule. So that's a wait and see, okay? So with that, I'll leave you. In November, we'll be back. Depending on the timing of the November episode, we may talk about some ballot initiatives that are happening in Michigan, or who knows? I mean, maybe there's something really compelling that happens between now and then. You never can tell, and that's why you tune into these videos. If you have any questions, you can reach me directly at jodyschaefer@workwithhrm.com.